Welcome to Faith and Politics, a show dedicated to discussing issues surrounding the intersection of church, state, and politics, and the examination of whether you're allowing your faith to shape your politics or are your politics starting to shape your faith. In other words, what do you do when God and government come face to face? I'm your host, Orlin Johnson. Let me introduce you to our roundtable of regularly scheduled panelists. First, we have with us Ms. Carmela Monk-Crawford, who's the editor of Message magazine. We also have with us Ms. Melissa Reid, who is the Director of Government Affairs for the North American Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We also have with us Ms. Bettina Krause, the editor of Liberty magazine. And we have Ms. Jennifer Woods, the General Counsel and the Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the Lake Union Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Ladies, great having you here with us again and looking forward to our conversation for today. You know, I was reading an article the other day that had a title that captured my attention. It said, "Religious freedom of women was the key to global peace." And this was something that was being addressed at the European Union at the Parliament in anticipation of the International Women's Day. President Camille N. Johnson, who's the Relief Society General President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, invited leaders to envision a world in which women cultivate, use, and expand their natural gifts. Reaching across faith lines is something that always builds peace. And I guess the idea is that as friends, we can achieve so much more than government. I was interested in how she viewed this as a global sisterhood, as being the mechanism that she thought would be very, very helpful in moving forward in this particular idea. So, you know, when I think about this and I try to understand this from a global perspective, and it's not that difficult for me to come to the conclusion that, quote unquote, women and their values kind of being in a leadership role could really end up helping from a religious standpoint and a peace standpoint is not that far a stretch. But then again, I was curious to see what your thoughts were going to be on that. Jennifer, how do you kind of look at this type of quote unquote analysis? And then maybe I may be oversimplifying it, or there may be something there that's even more complex.
No, I think that there's definitely this synergy between women's rights and also protecting religious liberty and religious rights as well. And I think that women can bring a unique perspective. And unfortunately, to me, what I see is that we don't have enough women at the table, either looking at the promotion of religious liberty rights and how those interplay with the rights of women as well.
You know, I think it's unfortunate, or it would make a lot of sense that women, if they were given their voice, or their voice was amplified, would certainly speak up on these matters of religious freedom and women's rights. As Jennifer said, they go hand in hand. They're all part of the the human rights equation or portfolio. But as we see religious discrimination and persecution occur around the world, we see that by a large majority, that is. That violence is towards women or children, right? The most vulnerable of a population. And so I think that they would be, again, if they had the opportunity and were given the voice, were at the table, as Jennifer said, would certainly speak up on the essential need for those rights and freedoms.
So, it's so interesting. I read this speech, and really I had two general reactions to it. The first is, I am dubious about, broad gender generalizations that are unsupported by evidence. So she makes the claim that women are blessed with a unique moral compass. I think humans all have a pretty similar moral compass in general. And second, this idea of a global sisterhood of peacemakers, lovely idea, logistically impossible, because where religious freedom is most impaired are the countries where women, as Jennifer and Melissa have rightly pointed out, that's where women have the fewest rights. Their circle of influence is circumscribed by the family circle. They have no voice outside of that. And so really, Jennifer, you talked about we need to have more women at the table. Absolutely. But we're structurally unable to do that because the women who are most affected by religious freedom abuses are the ones who can't speak for themselves. They can't put themselves at the table They need someone else to help them get to the table. You know, there's been a number of studies about the very specific religious freedom violations that are experienced by women, because it is true that women have a different experience of religious freedom and violations. I mean, they're very much gender specific. They can be like forced marriage, they can be rape, they can be, forced conversion, very gender-specific experience of religious freedom. So I do agree that the idea of women and religious freedom needs to be studied more in depth. I'm a little more skeptical that we are on the verge of creating a global sisterhood that will overcome all religious freedom violations.
Yeah, I don't think that we're there yet. You know, as I was thinking about this piece, I actually looked to see what my faith tradition's stances as far as, if they had any statements on women. And they have this statement from 1995 talking about the fact that women need to play an increased role in leadership in both church and in society, and the fact that the church can only fulfill its mission as women are empowered. That was almost 30 years ago, right? So we can have all of this talk as far as the need for women in leadership, the need for women to be at the table, but I don't always see that equating to us actually having an increased role.
Well, Carmela, I got to ask this question because as somebody who's kind of looked at this issue from time to time, one of the things that I've noticed is that sometimes the toughest group to get on board in promoting more women are women. We find individuals who, I think as Bettina may have mentioned, is kind of structurally kind of believing that there is a certain structure and hierarchy in which men will be quote unquote at the top. And as a result, some are maybe more comfortable or they just view it as that's how they see it happening. But I don't know, have you seen anything like that? Or maybe I'm just completely missing it here.
I refuse to answer the question on the grounds that it could really incriminate somebody. I'm not even going to go there today, but I will say this. I think part of the story with President Camille Johnson in this role is that she is in the role. The fact that she spent, 30 years as a corporate attorney and now holds this major position in the LDS church is very interesting because they do have certain views or certain encouragement that women should be at home taking care of the children, and there is not a higher responsibility than that of caring for one's husband and children. Now, I have to say, I believe it is central and critical to take care of your husband and your children. I just know that my conscience demands, and the direction that my conscience can points me in cannot be discounted. And so I'm glad, kudos for her standing there and taking the mic at an important time and expressing these high and lofty ideals. I hope it works out. No lies detected. Yes, when she's there, what she's talking about, it is true. Women can do and come from a different perspective, a perspective of service and compassion. There are some ideals that could be put into play if we're at the table and in decision making. And there are systems that need to be changed that need a woman's touch. Like I said, no lies detected. It remains to be seen, as Bettina has said, as Jennifer has said. We've all experienced these lofty ideals not come into play in the way in which we would like them to.
But Melissa, I mean, the idea of this global sisterhood does sound lofty. And when we look at segments of society that can't find a way to get along, it almost begs the question, why would it even be possible to think that there could be, quote unquote, a global connection from a sisterhood perspective? Because women of varying viewpoints will find themselves in a position where sometimes, sure, you disagree, sometimes you want to be part of a sisterhood, but it seemed like Camille Johnson was looking for something else. I got the sense from reading the article that her thrust was trying to shine the light on the fact that there is not enough of a voice of women. And that if there was more of a voice taking place, then quote unquote, we could find ourselves in a better situation. And that's how I kind of read the article. Not that there was this quote unquote nirvana in her mind that this is where it's all going to end up, but shining the light on it forces a conversation that every now and then could move the needle. Or maybe I'm missing it. What do you think, Melissa?
So you're saying it was aspirational as far as the tone of her comments?
I think that's close to where I was. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I second and third, and all, what all of my colleagues here have said, which is we'd love the chance to try, right? But right now it's just, as I said, aspirational. The thing is, though, I don't think that we should look to one segment of a population or a society to solve the international situation. So, as you know, I work on Capitol Hill. So much of what I do is coalition work, and I work with a real diversity of partners, coming from representing all different ethnicities, religions, various genders, all of those sort of things. I feel like those diverse voices and perspectives really enhance the work that we're doing and really help empower the work that we're doing. So absolutely, I feel like, if the point of the speech was, women need more representation and opportunity to, be at the table, then absolutely yes. At the same time, I feel like having a diversity of voices and perspectives really is sort of where I am seeing the most effective way to impart change.
Number one, it's lovely to be part of the Sisterhood of Faith and Politics program. This is lovely. But the second point that I want to return to is that, yes, I agree that it would be wonderful if women could take a leadership role in this and many other social issues that we need to deal with. But the reality is the experience of women in the United States and other Western democracies is an absolute minority of the experiences of most women around the world. When you're talking about women and religious freedom, I think back to a decade ago when we had, something like 280 girls kidnapped from a Nigerian school in northern Nigeria. And the Boko Haram, a leader then went on record taking responsibility for the kidnapping. And he said, Allah instructed us to kidnap these girls because slavery is allowed under Islam, and these women shouldn't be at school. They're old enough, they're 9 years old, they're old enough to be married. They should be married, not being educated. Now that is the reality of most women, well, not most women, but many women around the world. So asking them to come to the table and to raise their voices or to join a sisterhood of, it's a lovely idea. It's impractical. We need to work more on these root causes of violence against women around the world before we can engage in these highfalutin ideas.
And if I can just add, Orlin, really quickly, wouldn't it have been fantastic if it had been a male leader making these recommendations or these aspirational, rather than looking to, the one woman who had the leadership position to sound the alarm and be like, oh, wait, by the way, guys, things are tough for us sometimes.
But, and I think that's right on point, though, Melissa, but sometimes you do have to sound the alarm, because there are many things that have changed in our society after the alarm was sounded. And then we were kind of interested to see that there were different groups that actually showed up to be supportive that many of us may not have ever thought was going to be supportive. So I do kind of commend just sounding the alarm, because sometimes that's what's required. There's a case that's called Individual Members of the Medical Licensing Board of Indiana versus Anonymous Plaintiff 1. Religious believers of many faiths have been protected by something many of us have worked on before, which is called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. We affectionately call it RFRA, and Congress passed this by overwhelming support in 1993 to ensure that the federal government cannot unreasonably violate Americans' religious freedoms. But since then, we've had many states that have been looking to adopt their own RFRA laws to try to strike some type of balance. And many of those states have been trying to figure out, how do we engage in this and not create a burden on one's sincere religious beliefs, but also making sure that there's a compelling reason for them to be doing so. In Indiana, though, we have a group that's trying to use the state RFRA to argue that Indiana's new abortion law violates their claimed religious beliefs, which they say compel them to obtain abortions in the 9th month of pregnancy. One of the issues that we have been noticing with this whole idea that, and to some degree, this particular court at the Supreme Court level, let's put everything back in the hands of the states. Let's let the states make their own choices, their own decisions. It appears as though we're going to be looking at these things happening from state to state to state, in which we're not going to be knowing what's going to happen when you cross one line, go to another line. There are new rules, new regulations. Bettina, is this going to be getting to be more confusing? The word that I've been using in other shows today is whenever we've got changes in the law, it's messy. I feel messiness happening here all over again. What are your thoughts when you see this happening from state to state to state?
Messy is an understatement, Orlin. Messy is an understatement. What this case reminds me of is the fact that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is not designed or intended to only deal with claims from Christianity or a certain version of Christianity. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act is designed and should be used to look at the claims of people who bring unusual, out of the norm issues to the courts. Mm-hmm. And so here we have a number of women, predominantly Jewish women, who are bringing this claim under RFRA to challenge the near total abortion ban of Indiana. And many people have expressed shock that RFRA has been used for this purpose. But that is the point of RFRA. It's not to just simply give a stamp of approval to religious practices that are inside the norm and popular and well accepted. It's also there to look at claims that are not popular, that are outside the norm. And this is a very good reminder of that fact. Now, the case itself is a very interesting one, and it really depends on your perspective as to, which side you feel it should come out on. But I do think it's an important reminder that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is more than just an affirmation of a Christian worldview.
Absolutely. I think it is very interesting when you look at the history of this case and some of the first filings, they lay out the different beliefs of different faith groups with respect to abortion that I have never heard until this lawsuit. I didn't know what Jewish people believed regarding when life starts. I didn't know what Muslims believed regarding when a soul is actually a soul, or when an Episcopalian or a pagan or a Unitarian Universalist thought. There is a religious component to this, which is what the judge said in an early briefing, and he was saying, well, this abortion as we know it now, the current law, is based not necessarily on science and viability, but on the religious beliefs of a certain segment of society, and that segment being the prevailing segment whose beliefs are the ones that are carrying the day. And so there are people who have different specific beliefs. And I guess I kind of take issue, Orlin, as you set this part up, because this was not so much to give someone the right to abort in their 9th month. It was to give someone the right to make this choice according to the dictates of their conscience. And that conscience and their religious beliefs may be different from yours and mine.
But Melissa, when I take a look at this, one of the things that I found interesting, and Carmela hit upon it, there were so many different viewpoints as it related to abortion as connected to multiple different religious organizations. I mean, I've been studying religious organizations and issues for a very long time, and this was the first time I'd seen it spelled out that specifically before, which begs the question, what else don't I know? What else is out there that I don't specifically understand? So when someone shows up and said, this is violating my religious beliefs, you can't even snicker or wonder anymore, because if you don't have the total picture, you might be missing out on something. And Melissa, that was the thing that struck me when I was looking at this case. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that's exactly right. And I think maybe based on who wrote the article on the piece and sort of their perspective. And then, you read another article written from a different perspective, and it sounds like two totally different situations, right? So I think we're often surprised in these situations. One thing I wanted to mention, Orlin, so we talked about the federal RFRA, which was passed in 1993. We've mentioned it many times on this show before, and how it was passed by a wide, vast majority, and huge bipartisan support. What we are seeing on the federal level now, and just very recently, we're seeing legislation introduced that deals with women's health, federal legislation that deals with, one is the Right to Contraception Act, the other is the National Access to In Vitro Fertilization. Both of those include carve-outs for Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Now, that should be alarming to people of faith, regardless of what you believe about the right to access in vitro fertilization or contraception. As we said many times before, RFRA is never an absolute. It's just the opportunity to have a conversation, to see if those religious rights are being protected. But either of these pieces of legislation, which are not going to pass in this congressional session, and when they were introduced, it was mainly for show, right? They were introduced by the Democratic Party, and basically it's a way for Democrats in an election year to say, we care about women's rights, even though there's absolutely no chance of these passing. But that said, if they pass, it would be the first time since the legislation was enacted that these exemptions would take place. So that would be huge. And as we know, those that are working in this sphere, once something happens, it opens the floodgates for it to continue to happen. And so this is standard boilerplate from now on for this carve out to occur.
The thing that struck me is kind of what Melissa and what Bettina and Carmela were talking about, and that is the strength of RFRA is really going to be tested by how it is applied to these minority views, religious views, right? For the longest time, the dominant religious narrative as far as abortion has just been this one, right? Everyone's heard it. It's pro-life, this absolute. And now that we have these other viewpoints coming out, there's religiously based beliefs regarding abortion, I found it a little bit disheartening that people are now questioning the sincerity of those religious beliefs. And so I'm glad to see how the case has gone so far, the fact that they just haven't been dismissed as insincere, but it's going to be telling to see how strong RFRA really is when we're dealing with a non-dominant religious view.
And that is absolutely right. As Jennifer says, RFRA is there to protect predominantly minority rights. Majority religious practices, by their very nature, don't need that much protection. But minority rights, like the right to wear a beard or to wear a headscarf or to, carry a ceremonial knife if you're a Sikh, these are all minority practices that RFRA has over the years protected. And as Melissa said, RFRA from the left has gotten a bad name at times as some kind of religious trump card, that if you're faced with a law or a restriction that you're not happy with, you just pull out the trump card of RFRA, slap it down on the table, and you've won, which statistics show is completely incorrect. There was a study done recently, some 60% of plaintiffs in RFRA cases lose their religious claim. It's not a religious trump card, but as Melissa said, it's a chance to have a conversation, to bring that claim, even an unpopular claim like the right to abortion in Indiana, that in that context is an unpopular minority view. But to be able to assert that religious claim is what RFRA is all about, what religious freedom is all about in America. And regardless of what we believe about the rights and wrongs of this particular case, we should all be behind the right of individuals to assert their religious freedom.
Orlin, when we look, we talked about, huge bipartisan support of RFRA when it was first passed back in the 90s.
Yeah.
It was also highlighted, and maybe, Jennifer, we need to do a re-education campaign amongst, the broader public, because it was championed as a way to do exactly what you're saying as far as the rights of minority faiths. You saw that in the organizations that were involved in working, tirelessly advocating for it. It was the minority religions that, really were sort of in their day and out. And so it's interesting. Again, we're living in this world where everything is politicized, because you're now seeing a backlash against Christians or a minority faith tradition making use of this legislation, whereas it should be all religions, right? It shouldn't be just minority faith traditions. It shouldn't be majority faith traditions. It should be something that should be, hey, it makes sense that we all make use of this legislation.
And, I think, and I'll let that be the last word on this, this is one of the issues that we have to worry about from a societal standpoint. Religious groups have lost credibility. And there is a loss of credibility to some degree that causes society to not really want to, what I would say, empathize with some of these needs. And I think part of this re-education that you're also talking about, Melissa, is helping the religious community to understand how important it is to go about what you're doing in the most credible way possible, so that in the long run, all religious groups will benefit. Hey, Jennifer, tell me something I don't know.
Sure. Since we were talking about International Women's Day, did you know that it was first officially recognized by the United Nations on March 8th of 1975, and that was also designated as the International Women's Year?
Didn't know that. Melissa, tell me something I don't know.
So, we've been talking about RFRA and how it was, broadly passed and applauded and supported back in the 90s. Did you know, Orland, that the lead sponsor of the 1993 House version of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was then New York Representative Chuck Schumer, the gentleman who's now leading the drive to strip away those protections in legislation?
Wow. Carmela, tell me something I don't know.
Talked about women's rights and so many things regarding women today. Back in the 19th century, I saw this wonderful quote from the Orthodox rabbi Moshe Pressbury that every woman should take into account. No woman is required to build the world by destroying herself.
Wow, powerful. Bettina, tell me something I don't know.
Hey, Orlin, another one of my odd facts, and it's about Indiana this time. Have you ever wondered where all those letters to Santa Claus go from kids every Christmas? They actually go to the town called Santa Claus, located in Indiana. It receives thousands of letters every Christmas.
Didn't know that. Find out something new every day. Really enjoyed our conversation for today, ladies. And thank you for being here with us. Hope you enjoyed our conversation. Just remember, if it's about God and government, it's faith and politics. See you next time.